This week, I am very excited to release my first ever bonus episode. These episodes will provide more context, new perspectives, and my personal thoughts on this journey. As we enter the halfway point of part 2, I want to take a moment to sit with all of the new information I have learned about my dad's murder so far. Right now in the story, things are very intense between my family and the police, with one throwing blame at the other and progress seemingly stuck in this loop. Today, I'm speaking with someone who is very familiar with that process. You may know her from her podcast, Voices for Justice, or from social media where she uses her platform to advocate for victims and families. Sarah Turney's story is equal parts heartbreaking and inspiring. I am very honored to have her with me to share her journey, but also to talk about what happens when family and investigators don't align. Sarah is well versed in what it means to take the case into her own hands and do whatever it takes to get closure. We discuss complex family dynamics, the struggle putting yourself and your story on display, what it means to fight for justice, and so much more. And now, here is my conversation with Sarah Turney. Welcome, Sarah Turney. How is it going? How are you?
I'm good. Thank you so much for having me. How are you?
I'm great. Thank you for joining me. I'm really, really excited about this conversation. Just to kick it off, tell us a little bit about you, your journey, your story.
Sure. My name is Sarah Turney, and I am the sister of missing teenager Alyssa Turney. It's a very long story, but to keep it short, my sister Alyssa went missing in 2001. I became the family contact when I was a teenager, and at a certain point, the police sat me down and said, "We believe your father killed your sister. There's not much we can do. We suggest you get media." And I did exactly that, which is why I'm sitting here today. I went on TikTok, I created a podcast called Voices for Justice, and eventually my father was arrested for her murder, but then acquitted. So now I am here just trying to help my sister still, as well as help some other families.
Amazing. What you do is just so noble, but also the resilience you have to help other people while you're still sort of dealing with this unresolved case is truly just outstanding. I would love just briefly to hear a little bit about your sister and who she was and what she was like. I feel like that's a piece that sometimes is missing from stories, but we get to tell that side of the victims. So
Yeah, no, I love talking about Alyssa. And what's funny is if you would have asked me when I was 12 when she went missing, I would have said, she's the meanest big sister ever. Because, we were truly sisters and we were 4 years apart, which meant a lot of me wanting to hang out with her while I was like not cool enough. You know what I mean? I wanted to steal her clothes and all those things. But she was truly so sweet. Really kind of like a Sour Patch Kid because if you messed with her, you didn't wanna do that, but, she'd always come back around and just, like, the sweetest thing. Of course, she was also going through some really difficult times that I didn't know about and wasn't able to understand as a child, so Alyssa was in this unique position where she was not only my sister, but essentially the only mother I ever had growing up. Our mom passed when we were very, very young, and so she would do my laundry and take care of me and do my hair, and she had just a massive amount of responsibility, but through it all, she continued to be kind and be this extremely bright light. Just really what I would say is, like, the epitome of the cool teenage older sister. That's how I still see her today.
I love that. It's also funny because my older sister is also Alyssa, so it's a very for all the similarities, it's another added element to our stories, which I think is very interesting. Um, so in your story, even in just sort of the synopsis, the really key element is this interesting dynamic between the family and the police. And I find that the media attention is almost unwelcomed in my story, which is very interesting that that was sort of the recommendation. But I can't get over how interesting it is that the police, who are sort of meant to solve cases and investigate and are paid to do that, are telling you, like, get on social media and, like, that will help us do our job. It's such an interesting dynamic. So I don't know if you can talk a little bit more about how that felt, what that was like, sort of the, like, I feel like I would be like a punch in the gut to hear that and think like, what do you want me to do that versus you do what you're supposed to do?
Yeah, I mean, to be totally honest, I still don't know how I feel about it. I don't know if it was a genuine recommendation or kind of them telling me, like, good luck in the future. Maybe you should get some media. I will say that that particular detective who told me that has told another family the same thing. They sat down, the family of Brandy Myers, and said, we know what happened to her down to the color of trash bags she was disposed in. But we can't help you, get media. So it's very odd, and maybe it is Phoenix specific. I'm not quite sure, but really at that point when they told me, I had been the family contact for maybe 10 years. I mean, I've been dealing with this since I was a kid, essentially. And so I just took it as a directive. I will say that they, at first, I thought they were going to help, crazy, crazy idea there. But they said, we're going to do all these radio spots for your sister through the Silent Witness program. And your sister's going to have a billboard on every freeway in Phoenix. And she didn't get a single one. When I asked them to, do something like we had an offer to, do a panel at CrimeCon actually, with, some really well-known people, they said, "We don't think that's the right audience." So, every step of the way, they have refused to do this media with me, while also telling me to get media, so I'm still confused about it, but yeah, I mean, it is the hardest journey in my life. I am still very much an introvert. I don't love being on camera. I don't like being in front of a microphone. I used to like do events and marketing behind the scenes. I worked with kids in foster care. I was never someone who thought they were going to be some type of influencer or, name in true crime. I just wanted to help my sister. And eventually, after going on every podcast and every YouTube channel I could think of, I mean, I did everything. I went to an apartment, with these people who had 2 subscribers on YouTube. I was like, "Let's go. I don't care. I will talk about my sister in any form or medium, wherever I can to get her story out there." And then eventually, I was told, "Why don't you just make your own content?" And so that's kind of what I did, but, it's hard. Like I said, I still don't know what the police think about me getting media. If they really set me on this mission with a purpose or to make me go away. I don't know.
Yeah, wow. And I think it's so interesting the interactions with the family of victims and the police. Even when I reached out to get information, case files, etc., the very first question they asked me was, am I a family member or am I a journalist? And I was curious why the response would be any different regardless. If you're going to hand over the case files to a journalist, why wouldn't you hand them over to the family member? And so I remember in that moment having to make sort of a split second decision of like what I was going to respond as and what would the reaction be either way. And I can't help but wonder if I would have gotten the case files quicker had I said I was a journalist. Um, and that interaction can always be like hit or miss. You've talked to a lot of families now and met with victims and families of victims. Have you noticed any difference in interactions that they're having with the police versus someone who's maybe writing an article for the LA Times or making a podcast sort of unrelated as a third party person?
So I think a lot of my answers about true crime, which can be frustrating, are, it depends. And I think that's the honest truth. I can say in my case, the Phoenix Police Department were happy to hand over my sister's case file to a journalist that they had a relationship with that they liked. And when I asked for the case file, I wasn't sure I was going to get it. So I think it just depends on whether or not the trust is there, to be totally honest. I think sometimes officers look at family members as I don't think there's any real PC way to say it. I think they see us as extremely emotional and kind of like loose cannons, and I think that they fear if they give us the case file, we're going to go crazy, which it's such a hard battle because if you release it to a journalist, why not to the family? That's my argument. If you're gonna release it to one, just release it to all, and make it fair there, but I see it all the time, and I think the the best way to improve these relationships between law enforcement and families is just transparency and honesty. You know, the Phoenix Police Department didn't need to tell me that my sister was going to have a billboard on every freeway in Phoenix. They set me up for disappointment and they knew that. So when I come back and I'm upset about that and they go, "Whoa, you're being emotional." It's insane to me. It's absolutely insane to me. I think most families when they're set up with reasonable expectations that are then met, there's not a lot of hatred there. There's just a much better working relationship when you set up realistic expectations and then meet them. And I think that's what those relationships are really missing is we're really kind of sold the world. And then when we ask and follow up about all these things that they promised us, they act like we're insane. And that's when all this bad blood happens.
Yeah, totally. How has your relationship with Phoenix police evolved over time? Because now you've gone through a trial and an acquittal, and now how has that shifted from the beginning when they first said, "Well, we think we know who did it, and you just have to get attention?"
Yeah, it depends on the officer, but I will say that after that, our relationship got pretty bad. They weren't updating me. Her detectives that I'd known for 10 years, these guys that I knew since I was 17, were reassigned. And I was dealing with new people who didn't know about my sister's case. And when let me just say, I make an effort to communicate with the police as if I'm in a business transaction. It it's their job, they're just doing their job, and I try to make it, as crazy as it sounds, I try to remove as much emotion as I can because I feel like they just respond better to that. But even then, I would be like, "This is, my 40-second follow-up to try to get a meeting with you guys. I would love to speak with you." And they just like I said, it depends on the officer, but I've gone through some really tough ones, and when you know your loved one's case, when you've read that case file and you're dealing with a brand new detective who has maybe skimmed it, it's gonna create some bad blood there because you're like, "What are you doing? You don't know this case. How are you gonna help this case?" One of my most talked about conversations and episodes throughout my sister's case is when I talked to the commander of her unit. Really, it's episode 24 in my podcast, so you know my sister's story by now. And I go in and talk to this woman who's brand new to the case, and she's telling me things like, "There's no accusations of sexual assault in your sister's case file." And my mind explodes because I'm like, "There's over 12 people in these documents that have talked about it. What are you talking about?" And now it's about saving face. And that's when they start going, "Well, no, that's not exactly what you're reading." And they try to just kind of they gaslight you. And I think again, that's where things get really bad in these relationships is when they stop being honest because they're afraid you're going to expose them. And I don't know what the remedy is for that because at the end of the day, my job is to fight for my sister, not to make you look good. But I will say also, I have a relationship with one of the detectives that was on my sister's case from 2008 until now, and I love him. He's fantastic because he won't set me up for failure. He tells me the truth, he gives me details, and he will never tell me something that he won't actually do. And I have a fantastic relationship with him. So it just depends.
Yeah, wow. Yeah, it's such a case by case, for lack of a better word,
Yeah.
situation, person by person as well within that. Um, I just personally am so interested because, my case has never gone all the way through a trial yet. So I do have this sort of hope that if they get someone, it will go all the way through, and that's the person, who did it, and justice, for lack of a better word, whatever that means today, will be served. How are you handling and coping with the fact that there was an acquittal, and this is sort of still the person who you think did it? The police have, told you they think did it. How do you handle that, and what does that mean moving forward?
I don't think I have the luxury of handling it in any other way but picking up the pieces and trying to move on to the next. Of course, I take my time to grieve and be sad, but that's all I can do is pick up the pieces and move on, and that's really where I'm at. I'm told that other charges can stick if we can find perhaps my sister's remains, if we can find more evidence. There are other avenues to go down. But I will say that what I think of as justice, how I define justice for myself and for my sister's case has changed. To go into a courtroom and just hear lies. My sister was 17 when she went missing and was sexually abused for essentially her entire life. And to hear a lawyer basically slut shame a child who was sexually abused by her stepfather, um, and that not be called hearsay, and see things like letters that she wrote herself that allude to this sexual assault not enter into the courtroom because that's hearsay. Her own words are hearsay. I've lost faith in the justice system, and I don't think a conviction would bring me that great sense of relief anymore. It just is what it is, and maybe I'm just a hippie that way, but I don't need a judge or a jury, to tell me what happened in that house that I grew up in. I believe my sister who told, all her friends, told her friends' parents, she told so many people what was going on in that house. All of our brothers knew what was happening. I believe in that. So when a judge says the state didn't bring enough evidence to complete this in my courtroom, that doesn't mean much to me. You know what I mean? Yeah, it hurts. And I hated that. And I wish he was found guilty. And I believe that if it actually went to the jury, he would have been found guilty. But that's just how our justice system works. It's a game of showmanship and it's a game of technicalities and whose lawyer can be the best. And in that courtroom during that trial, my dad got so lucky with his public defenders. He had an amazing team of public defenders and they fought harder, so they won. Again, it's hard, and I think it has redefined what I think of as justice.
Yeah, that brings back, I'm having so many emotions. When I first started my show, a question I got asked all the time, because I was very much at the very beginning of this journey, was, when will it be enough? Like, when will I feel like I've done enough that I can stop this and sort of move on with my life? And I used to think, when I know who did it, when I know inherently I've figured it out, this is what happened, I will feel like that's enough, whether or not there's enough to take it through the court system, because it is so fickle. It's not guaranteed. It's not, here's the step by step process that happens every single time. That process looks different for every single trial that runs through our court system. I don't know if any two are the same. And that is so frustrating, because it does come down to, you can know that someone did something and not have the right type of evidence, or the right type of fingerprints, or the right type of something needed to actually send it through this system. And it can be very frustrating. And I do wonder, now I'm a year out from sort of saying, oh, if I just know that will be enough, sort of take an inventory with myself of like, is it? What is the right amount of information I'll have to just know and go to bed at night knowing that I know who did it? And will I feel closure knowing that they're sort of still out and about living their lives, doing whatever? Um, and similarly in our cases, whoever did do this, if they're still alive today and not in prison for something else, has been doing that for the last 22 years. They have been living their life, and will going to prison for the last 10, 20 years of their life really change anything at this point. I don't know. But it would be nice if the people whose jobs it is to find that person did it. That would be super awesome.
That would be ideal, right? That's when you grow up, that's what you're told happens, right? Something bad happens, the police come in and they help and they solve the case. I think people don't understand that this route that you're taking, that I've taken, is not plan A. Like, none of us wanted this to happen. And we thought, oh, this is our ticket to stardom. We're going to go put our whole dirty laundry out on the internet and have the best time. Like, no, this is the hardest, worst process I have ever gone through in my entire life, and that's being done in front of the entire world. Not a single soul, as far as I know, perhaps there is someone out there, but I have not met them yet. Not a single soul that I know has signed up for this and said, "Yeah, you know, it would be make a murder in my family even better. Let me go be this internet celebrity of sorts that people just crash on all the time." It's crazy to me. I think
it's so
ideally we all
crazy.
wanted these say you know, we wanted the police to just solve these cases so we could move on with our lives.
100 I that's perfectly said, and I always say that I don't want to be doing this.
Mhm.
I if I didn't have to do this, I would rather do literally anything else. I would rather do anything else than do this. And yeah, it's certainly not plan A or B or C.
Mm-mm.
Um, yeah, it's horrible and it really puts you through like it's a very isolating process, because not a lot of people understand, and that can feel very, I feel like I'm almost, like, living in this very small bubble, where I'm trying to convey how this feels, even to friends, just to have some sort of, like, connection to someone to just understand, like, "This is what I'm going through." And it just doesn't register because you can't know what it's like to do this and put everything out there in this way and deal with, what comes with that. All in an attempt to do someone else's job. It's just
Exactly.
such a weird thing. Um, and that really brings up sort of the next question I had, which is you are told as a kid really the only 2 entities you can trust when you're a child, you're told, are your family and the police. If something's wrong, you call your parents or you call 911, and that's, like, ingrained in you from the moment you can, like, process information. And to then, in your case and also in mine, realize that those 2 entities are actually the least trustworthy in these scenarios is, like, just so it's like you have to unlearn everything you've learned your entire life. How have you been processing that? And, I mean, you had to start processing that obviously at a much younger age, but what has that been like, and how even from, like, a mental standpoint, are you finding trust with other people and new people in your life?
Oh gosh, what a loaded question. I will say that, my father is ex law enforcement, so I have this like weird crossover of both, right? And I was also raised with a very healthy distrust of police. I was always told police officers are just like any other person. They can do good and they can do bad. They are any other person you meet in this world. Do not trust a police officer just because they wear a badge. And I will give my dad credit for that because I think that that's a pretty smart way to go about life. Anybody you meet, right? They're a teacher, they're a doctor. There is no automatic profession that makes you a good person. And I will say that with my full chest. I'm not bashing on police. I'm just saying humans are humans and they're going to do what they do. Yeah, I do have a hard time trusting people. Absolutely. I mean, I can't trust my family if I'm being totally honest because, one, we grew up in an environment that was extremely manipulative. I these days I do liken it to a cult. We still are trying to figure out what's reality and what was the reality that was created for us by our father. We were isolated from a lot of our family. So I guess I grew up without trusting anybody, which is extremely difficult when you get older. I was on my own at 12 when Alyssa was gone. At that point, I was cooking Thanksgiving for my entire family. I was making Christmas happen for the family. I saw that again when my dad went to prison and when I was about 19. Actually, I just turned 20. And it was like the whole world was pulled out from underneath me and I was on my own. So I absolutely struggle to trust. And what's even crazier is, once I got to that point where they're telling me to get media, I then put trust in the true crime community. I'm like, well, here's all these people that just want to help, that are just want to help all these cases and are being amazing. And you think everybody in true crime is in it for the right reasons, and they're just not. So yeah, I mean, I think my life is very much a cycle of wanting to trust people and then being let down by that. Not saying that there's not any amazing people out there, because there certainly are. But when it comes to something like this, and it just shatters your reality, you look back and question everything. I'm sure you feel a similar way. You question conversations your family probably had about your father. Was that true? What is true? It really makes you rewrite everything you knew.
100%. Yeah, I do. I replay conversations all the time and wonder what was really going on that I wasn't fully aware of and the context that I was missing. And even now, I find myself in my regular day-to-day relationships, like if I ask someone to do something, I'll ask them like 18 times if they did it, not out of like a micromanaging perspective, but like I just don't trust anyone. And until I've seen something done, I don't believe that you're doing it because I just don't trust anyone. And a very weird it's weird to see things like that manifest in your day to day and sort of be able to pinpoint back, "Oh, that's where that came from," or, "Oh, that's where, I developed that." But it is so interesting, to even liken your family to a cult, and I say that because I grew up in a very interesting religious organization that was also very cult-like, and then I ended up joining a sorority, which was also very cult-like, and then I worked for Lululemon, which is also very cult-like, and, when I meet people who were in cults formerly, they talk a lot about how it's actually very easy to jump from, like, cult situation to cult situation to cult situation because 'cause you're so used to that element of community, which is my least favorite word, and is, like, the scariest word maybe in the world is community. If someone is promoting that, it's like, "Oh, cult, immediately, that's a cult." Um, and I feel like the true crime podcast world is very similar to that, so I could totally see how you leave this family dynamic that's very culty and you jump into this like other group that's like, "Hi, come, welcome. Here we are. We're here for you." And like we're all buddies and we work together and we help each other and we're a community. And then it's like, "Okay, cool." Slide right on in. And then it's like, "Oh, this is not at all what I thought it was."
Yeah.
Because it's so easy to do that. And um I even now that I'm sort of in this world, I have to be so cognizant of like don't get sucked into, like, the community element of it. It's a cult, and anything can be a cult, and I talk about that a lot with my friends too. Literally anything can be a cult, but that is really interesting, to, like, sort of find yourself in that world, and yeah, it's jarring, especially I was a while at the same time I was sort of a victim, I didn't know it because I didn't know my dad was murdered, and I was just a consumer of true crime for a while at this weird crossover point of, like, not knowing yet that I was involved in a story and consuming this content, and so I also, as a consumer, assumed that these shows were really set with the premise of helping people. And it was so interesting to then flip so quickly to be on the other side of it and have this realization that some people that I had idolized for years, I'm now meeting them and interacting with them, and it's such a different world and dynamic. And that was a very interesting piece because those are the people that are getting access to the case files and have built
Mhm.
trust with the police and have done all of these things. And I, who am now sort of kind of like them, but also still a family member, don't have access to. And that was a very frustrating element to deal with in the beginning as well.
Yeah. I mean, the thing is, the true crime industry is the entertainment industry. And if creators who truly understand that and know that and feel that way, if they came out and said that, "This is all for entertainment, this is my job," people would be, appalled by that, and they wouldn't wanna listen to their shows. At least, I would say the majority of the audience. There are plenty of people in true crime who are just like, "This is entertainment, I don't care," and it is what it is. But I think, now especially, the game is to really act ethical, to pretend, essentially, that you care, and I think, on a certain level, they probably do care, you know what I mean? Like, they like what they do, they're getting the word out about these cases, and there is value in that, but not in the way that they show it. When you tell a family member, "I'm there for you, I care, I wanna help your person's story," that's a commitment that I don't think a lot of these creators understand that they are taking on. You know what I mean? Like, it goes back to expectations. If you tell me this is just gonna be an episode, that's it, and I'll never talk to you again, that's fine. I'm a grown-up, I can deal with that. If you try to pretend to be my friend, and then you act crappy after that, that's when it gets like, "Ooh, this doesn't feel good." You know what I
Yeah,
mean?
totally. Exactly. Yeah, it is so interesting fielding those dynamics and having to filter through on your own because people aren't as upfront about that. So you do have to use your own filter to sort of figure out what is what. And that's very difficult, especially some people are very charismatic. So it's hard to know the difference. And that's something that I took into consideration when making my show. And I'm sure you did too, because yours is, high quality, such a good, well produced show. I had to think about those things as well. It wasn't enough for me to get on my phone and say, "Here's my dad's story." I had to write out the script, tweak it again, make sure that it left on a cliffhanger, make sure I use good audio, add music here, sound effects here, mix and master it, put it out, and really compete with, like, the highest level of production quality because at the end of the day, even though I'm telling my own story, if it's not entertaining, no one will listen, and then no one will know about my story. And
Mhm,
dealing with that in my head when making this show was such a mind fuck of, like, even when I'm writing it, I remember at one point, my friend who's my producer, Jeremy, was like, "This is too emotional. You can't say this." And I would fight back, and then I'm like, "You're right. If I want people to listen, I have to hold back on this part, or I have to make sure that I say it in a way that's not too much." And even dealing with that was such a weird moment of like, I have to get people interested, so this has to be entertaining, but this is my life, and these are my inner thoughts, and this is my dad, and this is my family, and this is my mom, and my childhood trauma all wrapped into now I have to write a good script. It was
mhm.
so it was so crazy, and still every time I write a new script, I'm like, I struggle very much. I mean, there's probably 4 or 5 drafts each of an episode because the very first one is almost like, "This is my dear diary," like, "This is how I'm feeling today," and then it becomes eventually what it is. But the fact that I have to filter through that is not cool and not fun, but you have to sort of compete with the people who are so disassociated from the stories because they have no connection that they're able to write a really compelling script and leave it with this cool, question at the end that leaves you wanting more and it's wild.
It is. Well, and like you said, I think calling it a mind fuck is perfect because that's exactly what it is. Because I think, especially me, maybe I grew up in the era of like 90s sitcoms where like right is right and wrong is wrong and everything's, solved by the end of the day. So in my mind, I still think someone like your dad getting murdered, that should be enough to just compel people to want to help, right? Oh my gosh, this terrible thing happened. There's a murderer on the loose. Black and white, end of story. People should help. People should care. But that's not how it is. And to your point, you do have to add this element of entertainment to kind of hook people in. And I get it, right? Because I made my first season of Voices for Justice about my sister in 2019, where podcasting was even more of the Wild West, and, I knew I was gonna be attacked. So what I did was, I was like, "I'm gonna do mostly court documents, mostly just the case file, remove myself from it as much as possible because it's not about me, and I don't want people to think that this is led with emotion because that'll give them a bad taste in their mouth, especially back then. It was so different. It was insane. Leading with emotion as a family member was like the sin, the cardinal sin in true crime. They didn't want to hear from it. You're over emotional. You're too close to it. You can't see it for what it is. So I basically was like, here's all these court documents and interviews with people. Not much of my opinion in here. Please help. What do you see? And I really laid it out almost hoping people would see something different, that it wasn't my dad, but that certainly wasn't the case. I think less than 1% think something different in my sister's case. But now I'm going back and redoing her season, and it's a totally different ballgame. And I feel what you feel because I am trying to insert myself in there more. And it's hard. It's a game of theatrics where it feels like it shouldn't be, but at the same time, it's like this necessary evil you have to do to get people to care.
Yeah, and that's sort of going back to, like, the "this isn't plan A" element of it. I feel like if I'm going to say and mean it, that I will do whatever it takes, then I will do whatever it takes, and if that means I have to, tweak a script to get you really interested in this so that everything you're looking up on Reddit and tweeting and TikToking about is my dad's case, I will bite the bullet and I will do that. I just wish that I didn't have to. And
Yeah.
that's the weird piece of this that it's just so interesting. And yeah, I mean we're dealing with grieving this very weird loss that not everyone experiences someone in their life dying. Not everyone experiences it in this way, which I think adds this level of you can empathize, but you can't also because you just don't understand. And it is so weird to grieve that loss while also taking it on in such a hands-on way. And it's really taxing and it becomes, it's a full-time job. It's all
Yeah.
day. It's what you're thinking about all the time. And I think that doesn't help maybe the grieving process, but in a way, maybe down the line it does because you find closure in whatever way that looks for you. Um, what do you hope, or I guess what's an ideal outcome for you? Because in my situation it's similar. You're reliant on these entities. You need the police in order to, get access to information or take this case back to court or potentially go and find the remains that you're looking for. What's your goal or your hope for the future of your relationship with them moving forward? Because it's okay to be critical, of course, but they're probably having feelings about that. But knowing that you need them, it's a weird dynamic to deal with. And what do you hope for that relationship moving forward?
Yeah. I mean, it's an odd dichotomy because I have one detective who is like, I can't wait to see your sister's story on Netflix someday. And I have another that won't talk to me anymore. So it's very, very strange. But to your point, I do need the police. I'm at a point where essentially we need to find my sister's remains. And I can do that without police. It will not make a courtroom without them there. That's what I've been told repeatedly is I can go out, anybody can go out and look for any remains they want right now. I'm not saying do that, but essentially, if I cannot have a police officer there, a member of law enforcement to observe the process, to document the process, and I find something, whatever I find is very unlikely to be able to be used in court without them there. But they refused to. You know, they went on ABC 2020 and said, "We'd love to go look in Desert Center, California for your sister's remains." And I said, "Let's go. I have a million people on TikTok. I can get them to help. Like, I can raise the money. Whatever you need, I will create those resources for you. I just need your help." And they said, "No." Every place that they wanna look, they keep saying no. It's too hard. There's not enough resources. I can't bring in my own resources. If I do my own search, they've refused to send an officer to just watch. So I'm stuck. I can find my sister's remains, which again, I'm I'm a hippie, so I feel like her remains aren't gonna bring me that much closure, to be totally honest, you know what I mean? What's left of her. Um, so I don't know. I'm in this really hard spot of, do I wait for the police forever? Do I go out and do it myself? So yeah, that's really where I'm at right now, is just trying to get them to help, but also kind of knowing that that's probably not gonna happen.
Yeah, wow. Oh my gosh, it's like I was just telling someone your story and it's the most heartbreaking yet inspiring story, because of just how you are able to continue moving forward with your life and be so resilient in this. It's, especially for someone like myself who is newer to the world of publicly doing this, it is just like very inspiring. I'm gonna cry. Um,
Oh,
I really appreciate your perspective and just like how open you are about this. Because yeah, I mean, as we've said, it's brutal to do that, but it is very, very helpful for people like myself and I think for the industry in general to show what it looks like to be connected to a victim, but also share your story and make something that people listen to and want to watch in a way that is as ethical as possible. Um, and I think, yeah, it should be an industry standard to do it the way that you're doing it. So,
wow,
um,
thanks.
yeah, thank you. I do you have anything else you want to add? I know we've like covered literally like all over the place, but
I mean, I could talk about it all day. I do wanna say, because I think a lot of people see people like us and they think, "Well, if it causes so much pain, don't do it," right? And so I think talking about the alternative is important, and I think for some people, the alternative does bring them more peace. They can walk away and say, "I tried what I could, and now I'm at peace with that." But I think for people like me, and I'm assuming because of what you're doing, people like you, doing the alternative hurts more. I Especially before my dad was arrested, I couldn't watch Netflix for an hour without feeling guilty, without feeling like I should be doing something for my sister. And for me, it became this active form of grieving. I don't know where my sister's at. I don't know exactly what happened, but helping her feels better than being sad about it. So I guess just for anybody out there who might have been wondering why we put ourselves through this, for me, and I think for a lot of families, that's why.
yeah, totally. That is like, yeah, spot on, especially the career field that I'm in. I'm making television shows and films about other people's stories, and a lot of them are, in the unscripted space, so it's people telling their real story. It's not like a something that's made up, and every time I'm making something, I'm like, I should be showcasing this story, and this is, like, my story and my dad's story and who he was, and I think there's also unique elements in our stories where there's sort of, weird things that don't get talked about a lot. Obviously, my dad was a black drug dealer. There's sexual assault in your story. There's elements that people don't really like to promote in commercialized docs and it really ruins the element of like this perfect story of like, amazing father, family man gets murdered and like perfect daughter with loving parents gets killed. It's like it ruins that for them, and so to be able to share those stories as well and say, "But these are still loved humans who were very dynamic and had a lot of different elements in their life," For me, that responsibility weighs very heavily on my conscience as well, that even if it wasn't just my dad's story, I want to start telling more of these stories because that is really important, especially if the industry of true crime is going to continue on, whether or not I like it and whether or not I think it's ethical. Can I do something that positively impacts it in some way? And that is humanizing victims that don't necessarily fit the mold, and showing bigger companies and networks that people do care about these stories and you should invest in these stories. For me, that's just such an important piece of this. And I don't know what I'm going to do after this, but that is something that weighs really heavily on me and why my dad's story was so important because it was so dynamic in that way. Um, he wouldn't have ever been talked about on another podcast, um,
Yeah,
because of who he was and what he did, and that is just the brutal reality of it. So, yeah.
absolutely. Any podcaster, I should say, that looks at their analytics can tell you, at least that covers multiple cases. I can tell you right now, I could go into my analytics and pull it up, right? These picture perfect victims, if you will, they get more downloads than someone who doesn't look so perfect, somebody who's not white. Absolutely. I see that every single day in my analytics. And people can say what they want. You can't fight that data. You can't fight that data. People just don't care as much. I just published an episode about a young woman who came from Mexico to continue her education here in the US and was killed 3 weeks after she got here. And the analytics are just bad. The engagement on social media is just bad. People just if they can't resonate with the victim somehow, with the person being talked about, it's like they don't care. And how we bridge that gap, I still don't know, to be totally honest with you. But I think shouting about it and just talking about it and being extremely upfront and blunt about it is a helpful conversation. And I think all these conversations just have to continue in true crime until we can see some type of difference. It shouldn't take you crying about your dad, and not to use the word crying like you're complaining or something, but it shouldn't take you having to tell your dad's story for people to connect with you and to care. Again, it goes back to that
100%.
black and white. Murder is still out there. We need to get him. I wish
100%.
it could be that simple.
Yeah. Yeah. I agree. Oh my gosh. Well, thank you so much. This
Yeah.
was, like, beyond what I was even expecting, which, of course, when you talk with someone like yourself and we get together, it's such a different conversation than with anyone else, so,
Well, and I
um
love what you're doing, and again, I promise I'm not trying to keep you forever, but,
no.
like, it's so crazy to me what happens in true crime because if you look at just traditional media in general, right? Britney Spears's book, if you look back to the book that Princess Diana did with that writer, right? People want to hear right from the source. They want to hear from Britney. They want to hear from Diana. They want to hear from the kids that were abused on Nickelodeon. So, why in true crime is it so weird that we're out here telling the stories of our loved ones? Like, please. I can't think of another genre that operates that way. It's as if true crime is, like, the least welcoming to the people who were firsthand involved in these stories.
That is such a good point. I've never even thought about that, and I watch those docs and I consume that content because it's true, and I guess maybe because of my personal connection to a story, those just always resonated more with me. I like those better, it felt better to watch. Um, so yeah, I it is so interesting that we'd rather hear from a comedian than the actual person telling their story. Yeah, it's wild. But as you said, I mean, podcasting in and of itself still sort of feels like the Wild West, and true crime feels like the Wild West of the Wild West, where it's just like
Yeah.
anything goes, and for better or for worse, and maybe that's enabling us now to sort of do what we want and what we can because there really are no rules, but it also creates, a lot of gray area out there for people to run with things in ways that don't feel as comfortable and ethical. Um, but here we are. Um
Yes. I mean, freedom of speech is a two-way road, right? They can say what they want, and I can say what I want. And I have to respect that it goes both ways.
Totally. That's very true. Well, I really appreciate you taking the time. This was helpful even for me, but hopefully for everyone listening to sort of understand the interesting dynamics between not only families and the police, but just sort of this community in general and like what we are doing and the difficulties that it's presenting. Very much an uphill battle, but we are here and we're trugging along and yeah, I just really appreciate you taking the time to have this conversation with me.
No, I appreciate you. We need more families like you in true crime. Seriously, I love to see it. I'm always here to support you. And I always say this to the families I work with. It's like, I love you and I wish I never met you. And I wish we were never in these circumstances. I feel like that's where it's at in true crime. But thank you for what you do.
Thank you. Thank you so much for listening to Ice Cold Case. Your support means the world as I'm going through this investigation in real time to answer who killed my dad. You can find Sarah Turney at Voices for Justice podcast. We'll be back next time to continue the journey. In the meantime, please follow and share Ice Cold Case, and if you have any information, you can email it to icecoldcasepodcast@gmail.com. A video version of this episode is available on our YouTube channel, and a transcript is available at icecoldcase.com.